So my next question is, why did God come in an age where there were no printing presses or cameras?
So that's a fascinating one. Like nobody's ever asked me that question before. I was thinking about it. So we're kind of doing alternative history, right? So just to start with, would there be printing presses or cameras if God had not come? Like Christianity is very tightly bound up with the history of the world and the development of the scientific age, technology, uh, the United, discovery of the New World, all of these things. Okay, like all those people were Christians, and we don't know to what extent their Christianity was bound up with what they actually did. So there may never have been printing presses had Christianity not happened. Because the Christians were people of the book, people of the word, and that was important to them. So there's all of that. Um, and then I also think it's very clear that God's intention was to send his son when the Jewish people were still a people before Jerusalem was destroyed and when the sacrificial system was still in place. And then Jesus came as the fulfillment of that sacrificial system.
Yeah.
And of course, it wasn't that much longer that they rebelled decisively against the Romans, and Jerusalem was destroyed, and the sacrificial system was never again established. And that's all an interesting history of what happened there. But so I think that was part of God's intention. Another thing is that I think God intended to interact with certain people who didn't live later on. The Apostle Paul being an example. And so he wanted Paul to be his apostle. You know, and if Jesus hadn't come and lived and died and risen again, then Paul presumably would have just been a Jew and lived and died a Jew, and that would have been the end of that. So or John or any of Peter or any of the disciples, that he had certain. God always deals with us as individuals, and he had certain individuals he wanted to deal with and use in a certain particular way who lived at that time. So that's part of it. The other thing is, we're just guessing, but there also were fewer resources for fraud. If we think about it, in our own time, we have so-called magicians who can, we've got Photoshop, we've got everything, right? Where we can fake miracles so much more easily. In fact, sometimes people just fake things, for fun, right? And they're not really trying to deceive anybody, and they'll say, this is how I did it or whatever. All of that was missing at the time. You're not going to look like you're sawing a person in half or whatever when you're not really sawing a person in half. You don't have those resources. Also, the context of persecution was a good one. Now we got plenty of religious persecution today, but certainly in the developed West, right now at least, we're not crucifying anybody for being a Christian. It may still happen. We may still get there, but right now we're not in the Western countries. So people will make these analogies. Oh, people say they saw Elvis alive after he died. How is that not like Christianity? And I bring this up again and again when people bring up non-Christian miracles. Where's the context of persecution? Where's the context of persecution?
Yeah.
It is a pattern from skeptics to modernist liberal scholars like Dale Allison is a good example, who makes these comparisons to rainbow body claims in Buddhism. That they'll claim, oh yeah, my father was a guru and he died, and we went in there 7 days after he died, and his body was gone. It turned into a rainbow, and it's like nobody is getting stoned for claiming that their father's body turned into a rainbow. Okay, it's not happening. And so that context of persecution, it was in a sense ideal. I mean, it was no fun, for the people persecuted, but it was ideal for evidential purposes. That the gospel authors and the disciples, the apostles, they knew they could die, and some of them did die for what they were saying, and they said it anyway, and that removes their interest in lying when we look back to evaluate their testimony.
So like when people say, oh, history is written by those who were the victors, for instance, so there was all written down, but like, okay, wait a minute, this is an argument from Frank Turek. Okay, Christ gave it to Frank Turek, but this, I recall him saying this, like one of the motivations for human beings, like incorporeal human beings, money, fame, and sex, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
None of the apostles got any of those, as least for as we can recall or can.
And the skeptics will point to them bringing, bringing the selling their land and bringing the money to the apostles. They'll go, oh, look, money, But I also tend to think that the death of Ananias and Sapphira in that context is pretty striking, because if you misused that money or you lied about it, they believed you would die, that they were just the stewards of that money to use. And I don't think we have any evidence that Peter got rich off of this. They can point to that verse if they like, but actually what we find is Peter being beaten, being chased, going, it says he went away to a certain place, after he'd been imprisoned. We don't even know where he went. He had to kind of go underground. And eventually, and I think this is a pretty solid tradition, being crucified.
Yeah.
So
like reversed in Rome,
supposedly
right?
upside down, says the story. But that's not a guy who's doing this for money.